Today we are going to discuss the essay Prometheus Rising Background of Romantic Poetry by Harold Bloom. This work is a fascinating exploration of the Romantic tradition. It discusses the origin and influence of the Romantic era on poets even in the 20th century. Bloom insightfully analyzes the major poets such as William Blake, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Lord Byron, and P.B. Shelley. Bloom describes how the revolutions and the English reactions against them darkened the political backgrounds of English Romantic poetry. He starts with Blake and Wordsworth. While in their early years, England was a pastoral society and then turned into an industrial society. From the works The Marriage of Heaven and Hell by Blake, The Prelude by Wordsworth, and Prometheus Unbound by Shelley, we can understand how the French Revolution brought modern social upheaval and how it conditioned the Romantic poetry. From the poem London from the Songs of Experience by Blake, it can be understood that the situation in England during the last decade of 18th century and the first of 19th century was pathetic. People suffered numerous problems like no free speech, free press, rights were denied, anarchy was there, repression, social unrest, etc. were prevailing in England. Philosophic Materialism by William Godwin, the idea that there is no spiritual world, influenced the young Wordsworth and Shelley. But later they rejected this idea. Goldsmith's The Deserted Village is a work that celebrates the vanishing pastoral life of England. The misery of England during the 18th century due to the social economic changes can be compared to that of Black Death of 14th century. Blake's prophetic poetry was a protest against the French wars that were going on. Inflation, food shortages, hunger, unemployment, unrest, etc. paved way to riots and led to the Peterloo massacre of Manchester in 1819. This brought England to the verge of a revolution, but it never happened. In 1832, a similar movement happened in England but was averted by the backing down of the Parliament and by the first Reform Act. To idealists, a new energy had died in infancy. These internal movements helped Blake and Wordsworth to relate a new kind of poetry. It's not relate, actually, it's write. A new kind of poetry called the modern poetry. The term Romantic describes the literary period contemporary with the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. The term was not employed until the later Victorian literary historians looked back at the 19th century. Romantic became an adjective meaning wild or strange or picturesque. No Romantic poets ever characterized their work as romantic. The major Romantic poets shared the spirit of age thought, as William Hazlitt called it. To understand the link between Revolution and English Romantic poetry, instead of focusing on one of the poets, we should consider the case of the critic William Hazlitt. That's what Harold Bloom says. William Hazlitt kept his faith in revolutions. His personality was representative of English Romanticism. He had religious backgrounds of Protestant descent. We can say that English Romanticism is a displaced Protestantism which can be transformed by different kinds of humanism, which had been transformed by different kinds of humanism or naturalism. English Romanticism is a kind of religious poetry, and the religion is in the Protestant line. T.S. Eliot and his followers attacked this displaced Protestant tradition. That's why Puritans hated Eliot's new criticism, and the Catholic or the High Church Anglicans favored it. Hazlitt's criticism is important as Eliot's, according to Bloom. In order to prepare to read Romantic poetry, Bloom says that we should give a close reading of Book 1 of Spenser's The Fairy Queen and Milton's Paradise Lost. The spirit of Hazlitt, Blake, and the younger Wordsworth, Shelley, and Keats is a direct descendant of the Spenserian and Miltonic spirit. The autonomous soul seeking its own salvation outside the hierarchy of grace. That was the Miltonic or the Spenserian spirit. Miltonic exploration of paradise within man died of poetry after Milton, and this became incarnated in the two greatest theologians of the late 18th century, Richard Price and Joseph Priestley. The young Coleridge followed Priestley but later made ideological foundations for English conservatism and established Anglicanism during the Victorian period. In the works Religious Musings by Coleridge, Recluse and Prelude by Wordsworth, Marriage of Heaven and Hell by Blake, the use of apocalyptic language can be seen. Later, the apocalyptic impulse became purely ideal, as in Prometheus Unbound by Shelley. Pope, Swift, and Johnson were the rearguard fighters of neoclassicism, and they set themselves against every innovations, every mark of dissent, politics, metaphysics, and art. The Augustine fear of madness was so strong in Swift and Johnson. Johnson calls it the dangerous prevalation of imagination. Blake was considered mad by some of his contemporaries. His work, Mad Songs in Poetical Sketches, in that work, he satirizes the willful intellectual madness becoming an involuntary spiritual disorder. In Blake's The Book of Horizon, he gives his analysis of the phenomenon of the 18th century imaginative madness. The poets of the age of sensibility reacted against Pope and Johnson. In neoclassical theory, poetry was regarded as an imitation of human actions. In romantic poetic theory, there is a great departure from the notion that art is imitation. The function of metaphor played an important role in the discussions of literary principles in the 17th century. The central desire of Blake and Wordsworth and of Keats was to find a final good in human existence itself. They hoped that poetry, by expressing the whole man, could either liberate him from his fallen condition or make him see that condition unnecessary as an unimaginative fiction that an awakened spirit could slough off. Blake, Shelley, and Keats consider poetry prior to theology or moral philosophy, and by prior they mean both more original and more intellectually powerful. So this is a small gist of the essay, Introduction to Prometheus Rising. So this is just a small summary or the major ideas being picked out from the essay. So there has all these things has been detailedly explained in the essay. So if you want to, you can go through the essay, or if you only want the major ideas, please you can make use of this video. Otherwise, please read the essay for detailed explanations. Thank you.